So welcome to the Light Board meeting. I want to start by going over the future dates for our meetings, which would be September 14th, October 12th, November 9th, and December 14th. And Pam distributed a set of minutes for, I believe, June 22nd. I myself have not had a chance to review them, but I wanted to ask other board members if they've had the opportunity to do a full review and feel like they could vote it. I see a few shaking heads. So
I did.
We'll move that to the next meeting, and we'll continue to keep on top of minutes and get the July ones out as soon as we can. For chair's update, I don't have any real update or activity going on recently. So I think we can go right ahead to Dave, and you can give your director's update.
Thanks. CMLP's now has participating weatherization contractor list. The list is administered by Bode Energy Management. We have 4 contractors that are active in the Mass Save program, and they're willing to do projects for non-gas households in Concord. So that's a pretty good thing for us. The CMLP is accepting applications for ground source heat pumps, and you can get a rebate up to $15,000 for a household switching from oil, propane, thermal storage heating, or electric resistance. Right now, we have 3 customers that have signed contracts in the last few months, so that's moving forward. The advanced metering system project, we're in the final stages of contract negotiations. The final version of the contract for us has been reviewed by our legal team, and we've sent it back to the vendor. So I'm expecting to get the contract executed in the next week or so. We haven't heard from the vendor, but I think we've come to a good point with the contract on both sides. It's a pretty fair contract, so that's a good thing. We're now working internally on a deployment strategy, and fortunately, our metering team and myself have been through full town deployment before, so we have a lot of experience and history with that and what went well and what didn't. And we're planning on hiring a third party to install the residential meters, so that's about 6,500 installations, and then we'll install the commercial meters with our staff, as well as the load control devices. So that's moving along, and hopefully we'll have a PO issued in the next couple of weeks and move on to the next step. The Commonwealth Ave streetlight project is moving along. It's a lengthy project because we have to remove the existing decorative streetlight, install a new base. So there's some excavation and conduit work that's needed for each one, and then install a new base and then the light. So we're about 50% through that project. I think the lights are nice, and you know, it was time. The other decorative lights were breaking down. There were fiberglass poles and just, you know, at the end of life. So we're getting there. Hopefully we'll have it done in the next couple of months and move on. The middle school solar and storage project, a lot of movement on that. Solar Design Associates have revised the layout of the PV system for the new middle school. This is based on some feedback that we got from the school and some line of sight things. So they removed a section of the array from the original design. The rooftop remained unchanged, so that's still just over 516 kW DC. The array that was closest to the right of way that was parallel with the road is the one that was removed. I did send out the layout for you guys to see. They were able to take some of those panels and put them into other areas, so they only lost 6 modules in the process. So the new canopy size is just over 724 kW DC. So the total size is just under 1.3 kW DC. So we believe that's going to meet the needs of what we're seeing from the school in terms of their energy needs. And so, this has been sent to SMMA for review. And once they get back to us, SDA will begin working on the contract drawings to get them to the 60% to match the schedule that was revised that we received on August 2nd. Internally, we're working on the electrical distribution design that will feed the new middle school. Joe, Jeff Cosgrove, and myself are doing that. It's complicated. It's not like just putting an underground primary and a transformer. We have a bunch of protective things that need to be put in place because we have an array there and a battery storage. So working through all those details. We're trying to get that done as quickly as we can because we're seeing lead times longer than a year for certain devices, transformers being one of them. And so we want to make sure we get our orders in so that we're not delaying the project. Once we get the design done, the next step on that would be to do the cost estimate and put the contract specifications on the drawings and get those over to SMMA. So very active on the project at this point and, moving along. On the collection side, Carol's team's been doing a great job with collections. We've only had to shut off, a small number of customers for non-payment over the last few months. You look at it, the numbers I sent, I'll go through them real quickly. 30 days past due for electric is just under 190,000. And for broadband, it's just over 4,600. 60 days past due, electric, just under 22,000. Broadband, just over 1,000. 90 days past due, which is the area that we focus on for shutoffs, just over 40,000 past due for electric and just over 200 for broadband. So that brings a total past due for electric about 247,000 and broadband just over 6,100. We also on that report show the current amounts due, and for electric, the current amount due is just over 525,000, and broadband is just over 4,600. So we have a total amount due of it seems like a big number, 782, almost 783,000. But like I said, going through the process, Carol sends me the shut off list every cycle, and it's usually no more than 2, which is good. And those customers have been paying up, and we've had a small number of shutoffs. We've successfully hired 2 customer service reps. So they'll start on Monday, August 22nd. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. And so that'll bring the customer service team to full complement. And last week we interviewed another grade 1 line worker, and we're moving on to the next steps in the process. So that will leave us, currently we still have 2 line worker positions open. So we'll see how we go through that process, and hopefully we're successful.
Great. I have a quick question. So the middle school project, it's great to see that's moving forward. How do you feel that staff would be ready for some kind of public meeting on the solar part of the middle school project? I know we had our meeting earlier on, and we kind of went over with all the key stakeholders. Do you think they're at a point which they feel they could present this with agreement to the public?
Well, I think the next step is to get feedback from SMMA before we do that, because if they have input that changes things, I'd hate to present something and it be wrong.
Right.
So I think that would be coming after we get the feedback and move on to the construction drawings.
All right. So SMMA. And Carol, great job on collections. I know that's a difficult role. I know we were behind during the pandemic, and to see 40,000 for 90 days overdue, that's great.
Thank you.
Warren, do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I had a comment. Dave, you're probably aware of this, but I point it out in case you aren't. With the middle school solar project, under the Inflation Reduction Act signed yesterday, SMLP is now eligible to qualify for the investment tax credit. either getting it as a payment or a transfer to someone else.
Yeah, I did hear about that. I haven't looked into it though yet, but I will.
I mean, that should make a very big difference in the economics of it for the town.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that is important to the light plant.
Yeah.
Well,
Alice?
I just wondered, Warren, can you give me just another sentence on the impacts of that for CMLP?
Well, the thing is, as a tax exempt organization, CMLP, if it owned a solar project, was not able to benefit from the investment tax credit that a private entity would be able to benefit from. Now, under the new legislation, nonprofit entities, including municipal utilities, can either get the amount that they would have gotten from the tax credit as a payment from the federal government, or they can transfer the benefit to a for-profit entity who'll pay them for it. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work yet, but that's what's in the legislation. That's a big deal, not just for CMLP, but for nonprofit organizations in general in terms of owning solar.
So when you say a fourth party, would that cover a PPA agreement, or does it have to be wholly owned by the utility?
So
Well,
don't
that's
you
if
know?
the utility is owning it. Now, if it's a PPA, it's a different, there's a third party owner already.
Okay.
But this could potentially mean, I mean, you know, we'd have to look into it. This could potentially mean that there's more of an advantage for CMLP to own
Mhm.
facility directly rather than to have a PPA with a third party owner. But,
Yeah.
you know, I don't think that all the details are out there to know exactly how it's going to work yet.
Okay,
right.
great, thank you.
Excellent. Any other board comments or questions about the update? No? Then let's go ahead and we'll move on to Jason and the broadband update. And hopefully we'll get to the 8 o'clock for E&E and keep things on schedule.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks
Great.
for the opportunity. Reminder, you can always reach out to us at broadband@concordma.gov if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback. And these reports, the monthly reports that I've been sending to the Light Board for their packet, are now on the website. So if you go to concordma.gov/broadband, you can look under monthly updates. I think it's important that both the customers and the public know all the work that's going on here. We completed 14 new installations in the month of July. Plus an unusually high number of trouble tickets and several special projects ranging from the SCADA network work to expanding Wi-Fi access to the light plant garage and working on one-time efforts to expand our footprint in areas like Tanglewood Drive and Barkus Farm Road. People might have heard that the extremely dry weather has been causing havoc on trees. We've seen a lot of trees come down, which is impacting public works and the electric side and also broadband. So we've had a couple customers in the last 2 months that have had trees come down, and on long poles, this can take several hours to restore that service. So that has definitely impacted us. Our number of installations was also impacted by a lot of sick time and a vacation in the month of July. We had 16 sick days and 8 vacation days that month. So among the 3 telecom technicians alone, which definitely limited new installs. We've only had 1 sort of vacation in August, and so far no sick time, knock on wood. So that's encouraging. And we're also leaning on our third party to help get polls done so that our installations are faster when we have staff available. We originally had planned to do some fiber repairs in July, some splicing as a result of the rodent chew over at Losbrook. But our vendor kind of misjudged the scope a bit and needed to reschedule some resources to make some more time available for that. Originally, they were thinking of 2 days, 2 overnight days of work, but they now think it needs to be spread out over 4 or 5 days. And again, it's not going to, people aren't going to be out for any longer than they would have been. We're hoping just, minutes to under an hour in the middle of the night. And this is only about 55 customers that we've identified that will be impacted. But we think it was prudent to make sure that they were ready to complete the work in the scheduled time. So we're working on rescheduling that to either at the end of August or early September. We did notify those 55 customers via mail and also with the contact information we had on file. and we refer them to our website, which we now have a maintenance page under the broadband website to let people know. It's a lot easier to kind of put information in one place, social media and the website, than it is to continually, email people. But we let them know to take a look at that, so that they know what's happening and when that will be scheduled. I'm happy to announce, though, during that maintenance window, we were able to move our DHCP servers to the new infrastructure that we had deployed over at the substation 223. This now removes the reliance on the town network and equipment that we had before. Before, that was a good setup because we had sort of this enterprise grade equipment in the town side, but unfortunately, whenever the town needed to do maintenance or upgrade its equipment, it would impact those customers trying to pull an IP address. So we relocated that to the substation 223. And we also, it's completely redundant. We have tested the failover capability before we went live in a test environment, and it worked beautifully. We have dedicated hardware for this, and it's completely hardened. It's not reliant on any particularly public operating system or access. So we think this is going to be a big improvement for both making things simpler and more resilient in the long term. Previously, I announced that we were allowing potential customers to schedule walkthroughs through our new booking online booking platform, and that's been hugely popular. We've seen over 90% of customers or potential customers doing that, and it's removing a huge burden from our staff and the light plant staff for scheduling and rescheduling these walkthroughs. It allows people to reschedule their own time or cancel if they can't make it. And it just prevents that phone tag game that, every morning it seems like we lost an hour to people calling and calling back, customers trying to schedule something. We've now expanded that to installations as well. So now once a technician pulls fiber to a premise and it's ready to go, they leave a door hanger that has a QR code and a URL that they can schedule, and then they follow up the next day with an email, and then the following day with a phone call if they don't hear anything at that point. And we hope that this will make things simpler both for the customers and for our team as they look to schedule those. The monthly reports this month, it has 3 additional metrics that had been suggested by the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force. Those are road miles served, premises served, and parcels served. And the nice thing about this is that previously, those relied on a flag in our master address table that said broadband available. And so it was either a yes or a no, a 1 or a 0. And so that meant we could easily tell you at any given time how many parcels, premises, or road miles we could serve, but it was a lot harder to produce a report that showed you over time the progress. And that was one of the biggest things is, if our goal is really to expand our service, how can we track that without knowing exactly when different parcels or premises were added to the system? So we now have an effective date for that field so that we can say on this date, this location was added, and then we can produce reports to show you monthly, quarterly, or yearly how many additional locations we've added to our network. So I'm excited about that. We've have an RFP that's outstanding for help desk services that's due by Friday, the 19th. So we're eager to see what type of responses we get to that. We did get a couple people at our questions and answers session, and several people have requested a copy of the RFP. So I'm optimistic about that. One of the low-hanging fruit items we had talked about, and the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force had talked about, was we have hundreds of locations where we have installed fiber, had customers, and then they have closed their account for one reason or another, often because they move, but perhaps they decided to go with another internet provider. Those are kind of easy places for us to redeploy our service. They're not going to require splicing, pulling any fiber. They are kind of ready to go. We bring in a piece of equipment and we can turn them on pretty quickly. So we've identified that list. We worked with our billing vendor to come up with a history report so that we can now easily produce the list of number of people who've had service in the past and reach out to them to say, in under an hour, you can have Concord broadband. So we're weeding through that list to identify customers that may have already submitted an interest form in the last couple of weeks, and any other places that might not be eligible, like maybe this is a tear down and they're doing a rebuild, so they close their account for now, and it would be pointless to market to them because there isn't a location there. So we're going through that, and then we'll come up with a plan to reach out to those customers. In my update, I also talked about rates. I'm not going to talk about that now because we've got a schedule later for the meeting. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that we have a new GIS program manager, Neil Fotheringham, who starts today. I mention this only because GIS has been so helpful to Concord Broadband to date, helping with our metrics and helping us track the customers who are interested in getting Concord Broadband. So I'm excited to partner with Neil and hopefully expand our use of GIS even more so that we can become more productive. And that's all I've got.
Wonderful. Yes, so I'm glad to see the new metrics, and I'm glad to see the breakout between parcels served and properties served, because that is a big difference. And also roads that are served or not served. So that was a great addition, and it's wonderful they're available on the website, and that you're so structured in this report and providing such good information. Does the board have any questions for Jason about his update? I don't see any questions. So I am going to keep us moving forward and get ahead of schedule and ask that, I think, John, are you going to be leading the presentation for E&E?
No, our senior vice president of regulatory and NEPOOL chair, Dave Kavanaugh, is going to do it, Brian.
Okay.
I just want to thank everybody, for having us on this morning. We've been working with Dave Wood on this presentation on the, large scale solar and what that might mean for CMLP and kind of the things that go around it. Dave has a vast experience both at ISO, been with E&E quite a while, worked at a IOU, so he's well versed on this. So I'm going to just turn it over to him and let him go ahead if that's okay. Go ahead, Dave.
Good, thanks, John. Good morning, all. So I'll share the presentation here. And please, stop me as you feel you need to. So good morning, everybody. And as John mentioned, I'm Dave Kavanaugh, Senior Vice President of Regulatory Market Affairs, Energy New England. And working with Dave, we certainly understand that the Concord is looking to perhaps add up to 13 additional megawatts of solar behind the meter. And this presentation is to talk about what that might mean relative to pushback onto the system. Let's see, should move forward here. Trying to advance the slide here, doesn't seem to be responding. Oh, there we go, great. Again, Concord Municipal Light is considering behind the meter resource investments that could at times result in energy produced by the behind the meter resources exceeding CLMP's system load in any time. Concord Municipal Light is pushback is currently restricted by the interconnection agreements between Concord and Eversource. That's implemented by reverse power relays, is my understanding. Concord Municipal Light would like to understand how the pushback may be treated under the ISO Northern Tariff if the IA interconnection agreement was allowed to support pushback. An example of the pushback we're talking about here is if you look at this April 23rd load, real-time load. During the middle of the day, you're down as low as about 7 megawatts on system load. So if you add 13, you're going to be pushing back about 6 megawatts onto the Eversource system or beyond the Concord settlement area. So that would be 7 megawatts here at 13, push back 6 onto the system if you were allowed to push back. So we'll talk about what that would look like in terms of how it's treated in the market and according to the tariff. So really, when you look at this pushback activity or the ability of these type of resources to provide energy beyond their meter point, you really have 3 ways of looking at it. There's the ISO registered settlement only generator. That's a generator that is not modeled in the ISO energy management system. It doesn't require day-ahead bids. It is simply a receptacle, if you will, for when you push back beyond a meter point to capture those megawatts and have them treated in the energy market. You can also enter other markets. We'll talk about that. The other option certainly is a demand response. You can register as a demand response resource and be treated for your megawatts beyond consumption of the load at that retail point, and that pushback can be measured based on comparing the performance to a baseline. Last but not least is you can register as a distributed energy resource. FERC Order 2222 is a order that requires wholesale markets to allow for distributed energy resources, batteries, solar, other devices to be aggregated over a certain footprint and entered into the market and allowed to perform in the market under different types of market opportunities. That ruling is still in debate. It was filed February 2nd, 2022, ironically. And there's been some deficiency letter issued against the ISO. There's been responses, and folks are still responding, exchanging paper on those responses. So we'll unpack each of these as we go forward. How's the pace? All right.
It's a good
So
thing.
the settlement only generator option, really, when you look at the three options, is really the easiest. Now, for context, in my role at the ISO, I was there for 13 years. This was my department. I did all the settlement only generation registration, all the demand response registration, all the modeling of all the stuff in the ISO settlement model. So this is really the easiest. So imagine, if you will, we have this diagram here. You have the Concord municipal load. You have the Eversource meter, as you can see by the line indicated there. And then you would have this settlement object, this settlement only generator that would capture any of the megawatts that Concord was to push back onto the Eversource system. Those megawatts would be captured and they would just be settled at then the prevailing real-time energy market price. Fairly simple design. So when you do that, you again capture megawatts. This resource, this settlement only resource, is not telemetered to the ISO in real time. It doesn't have to put day-ahead energy market offers in, but it can participate in the energy market, the real-time energy market, and the capacity market. And that's the forward capacity market, where it could sell forward 3.5 years at a time its value, its perceived capacity value into the capacity market. This design, again, it's more simplified in that it doesn't require a day-ahead energy market submission. Just whatever the pushback is, it gets paid the real-time LMP. The megawatts pushback at this point would be used to offset the Concord Municipal Light Regional Network Service load obligation. So if the pushback were to occur in the hour of the month in which your network load is set by National Eversource, then that would, whatever it is, if it pushbacks, then you have a zero regional network service load, and your charges for regional network service cost allocation on transmission would be zero. If you were also to be pushing back at the time in which the seasonal peak, that 1 hour in a year in which the seasonal obligation is established for the capacity market, you would have a zero for the whole remainder of the next year. Again, pushback megawatts are paid real time, and it's really done with very simplistic equipment. It's the Eversource meter. It's the revenue quality meter they actually use today to submit the network load. It's the same RQM that can be used to submit the settlement only generator readings as well. Pause there, settlement only generator, if there's any questions on that.
Well, John, I'm sorry, David, how would you like to take questions? Would you like us to wait to the end, or would you like us to interrupt as we go along?
You know, I think we should probably just take it by segment of discussion, because that way there's, we'll get into more complexity and perhaps it'll be a little harder to sort those out later. So I'll pause here.
Okay. Well, I have a question. So the RNS and capacity obligations going to zero, those are usually set when solar is being used in the distribution system. It's not when we're at that solar saturation point where we really are probably going to be sending power. So, but my question is if we had enough battery capacity and we got to those, the capacity obligation hour in the summer, and we actually fed back to the grid, would that capacity obligation actually get registered as zero, or would it actually get registered as negative? I know it's a total hypothetical because I don't see it happening, but
Right.
Because I would see if our capacity obligation went down to zero, I think they'd reconfigure our obligation.
So on the capacity side, forward capacity market, it would be zero. There's no negative settlement for capacity markets.
Right.
I have not seen the occasion in which the RNS is then a negative value and also paid the RNS rate for having a negative value. I don't think that exists.
Yeah.
However, on the energy market side, we will see that production pushback would result in, and during when the LMPs are negative, results to a charge to Concord. But Brian, hopefully that helps with the answer.
It does. Thank you. Alice?
Thank you. So my question's at a slightly different level. I think I understand the model for how this would work. My question goes to a series of comments that I had read probably over a couple months ago from ISO saying that they were not supportive of multiple distributed energy sources coming onto the grid because it was just too difficult for them to plan and that it's too inconsistent for them. And that they were pushing back against the programs that they had in place that would allow the interconnection to take back the excess energy that's being produced by solar around the state. So I'm not sure how I think that's how I understood the comments that I read in the paper. And I'm just wondering how that plays with a model that allows that to happen when the ISO is not so likely to want it.
So Alice, good question. And there's a lot going on in this space. So one thing, the behind the meter, the use of behind the meter resources to, be used to reduce or eliminate the regional network service charge or your capacity charge was a litigated matter. We actually supported the approach where you can use that, and we actually won that at FERC. So that's law. That's allowed to happen. The other issue, perhaps you may be referring to, is FERC Order 2222, which allows for the aggregation of distributed energy resources, batteries, meters, thermostats, EVs plugged in over a geographic footprint. Now, there's been a lot of debate on that, and the ISO has 7 models that allow that to take place. So they don't prohibit it. It is just structurally done through models, participation models that allow them to capture the value of those resources and treat them in the appropriate markets in which they've decided to participate. So it's not a prohibition. There is generally broad concern about how inverter-based resources are interacting with the system, and certainly how they might, affect transfer capabilities and other issues. And that's just being worked through in how they set their network models up. So they're not averse to it. They have participation models that support it. And there's a debate that is going on between advanced energy economies and others as to how metering structures should be allowed to let these resources participate. There's a disagreement there. The market design didn't support all these other amendments, if you will. They lost in a big way, all of them, because they didn't really fit the models and really didn't fit what was going on in the region. So Alice, maybe that's perhaps what you were speaking to, and hopefully that's helpful.
I think that's helpful. Thank you.
Great. Brian?
You had mentioned that this option does not allow participation in the day-ahead markets, and it's real-time only. I think that's acceptable because with solar saturation, we're not really in control of when we distribute unless we use storage. But can you explain why we can't do, like, if we had a consistent pattern where we knew we were going to be solar saturated and sending power, why a segment of that couldn't be considered day ahead?
So, great question. And if you wanted to convert this model into what's called a capital G, capital A generating asset, then you could. You could convert that into a generating asset, and you would be a net generator that would be exporting to the system. If you didn't have a capacity supply obligation, you would not have a distinct obligation to submit day-ahead offers. If you do, you must submit day-ahead offers. So if we were to model this as a capital G, capital A generating asset, we would then look to include it in the ISO's, EMS network model. And then you would then have your own pricing node, and then you would have the ability to bid into the day-ahead market. And then this resource, if it was modeled as such, would then fall under a future design that comes in Q of 2024, Q4 of 2023. Do not exceed solar dispatch if that was the driving force. There's some interplay to make sure that we control those resources that have to bid in a day ahead market. So the bottom line is you could do it. It's a little more sophisticated. You have to, as you know, Brian, perhaps you have to bid into the day ahead. You're looking to understand the day ahead market and see if you're better off clearing the day ahead and take that against the real-time position. And if you don't produce in real time, then you're charged that value. So there's some sophistication around it, as you know.
Yeah, so I think we're going to be in the real-time market, and only when we have a large amount of storage will we really kind of think of day ahead. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this segment of the slide? I don't see any. So why don't you go ahead and keep going, Dave?
Great, thank you. So the other option is demand response, and there's really two participation models here. There's the passive demand response, which means you're not interacting with the market. You're submitting meter reads based on the participation models, what your performance is against a baseline. A classic example of passive would be a distributed energy generator that's running all the time, like a CHP, or energy efficiency. That's more of a passive resource. And you model that, it's a projected outcome. If you're familiar with energy efficiency models and how they project a kW savings, and you aggregate those and they say, okay, there's my savings. And the ISO looks at that, says we agree, and they award you a certain value. And that's more of a capacity play. The other side, the other participation model, is an active demand resource. And an active demand resource is, again, you're participating in the ISO market, you're providing them hourly inputs so they can track what your expected baseline is at any point in time, so that when you activate these resources in the energy market, they can actually value what the reduction in load is. The key point with these type of resources, they must be modeled behind a retail point of interconnection for them to, that's a FERC ruling, that's under the Federal Power Act. So any and all resources that you want to have, solar panels, batteries, must be located behind a retail point of interconnection at some customer site. And then you can measure the baseline performance and have that treated in the market. So it's a bit more sophisticated. That is, and I think right now under Order 718A, Concord is an open system. It will allow that to take place, but it requires some additional work, and I'll cover that here. It's a little bit more difficult to implement. Requires, again, the resource to be located behind, I see your hand, Brian, I'll come right to you, behind the retail point of interconnection. It's compensated by its deviation from a baseline. It requires special equipment, and not a big issue for Concord because it's a remote terminal unit you have to buy, configure it to the ISO system, test it with the ISO, and also because if it's an active demand resource, it must also have a dispatch point, a communication front end, which receives in response to ISO dispatch, and an entity that actually activates the resource and can communicate with the ISO. I'll pause there, Brian.
I didn't mean to rush you through that. So something like connected solutions where we have distributed storage resources, say at residence or commercial, and those are operated by CMLP, that would be kind of this demand response model where CMLP would be in control of these storage units and aggregate them together to act as one in this market. When you say retail point of delivery, is that the customer meter or is that the substation?
It's the customer meter.
It is the customer meter. Okay.
It is, yeah.
And so how does that affect that kind of distributed storage where we're aggregating? Does each individual storage unit need kind of special technology to be able to report? So the contract would be for each individual customer, not for the aggregate?
That's correct. That's correct. You could act as the intermediary as a third-party provider. And
Yeah.
so we're going to drop down a little bit. You can sign up each of these sites that are located at a retail point of interconnection. And for Concord, you can say, okay, I have this we'll use terminology, it's called an asset, right? Have this asset that becomes this resource in the marketplace, and you can aggregate all those into one and say, here's my performance. Now,
Yeah,
how you compensate them is another matter, but they all must be measured at the customer's retail point of interconnection. And then you aggregate their contributions based on their comparison to baseline to give your hourly performance.
all right. So we can still act as an aggregate, but individuals need to be treated on their particular performance.
That's correct. And,
All right,
and
so-
having done these in the past for CLMP, Connecticut Municipal Light and Power back in the day, you then have to have a model that would say, how do I treat that? Is it a rate? Is it a payment? It's, whatever on those individual contributions.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to let Warren go.
Thanks. Given that this is significantly more complicated than the first approach, I could see the downsides to this. What, if any, would be advantages of going with this approach?
I see, sorry, David, Warren, I see them kind of, I don't see them as this one or that one. I think demand response is really for storage or for large commercial shutting down. Whereas the first model was about solar saturation and uncontrolled feedback into Eversource. So I could see both of them applying, but one is overproduction of solar without storage. The other is we have storage assets or large commercial that can change operations. And that's how this second option would function. Does it?
Okay.
So I kind of maybe derailed your question. So Warren, please feel free to
No. So,
clarify.
Dave, do you agree with that?
I agree with it. It's correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right. So again, right, and this, Wendy? You're on mute. Wendy, you're still on mute.
Yeah, sorry, Wendy, you're muted.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask Dave, did you agree with Brian's interpretation of this version of being coupled with storage?
Well, storage can participate as the demand
Right.
response resource. There's nothing
Right.
prohibiting that. Again, it's just a measurement of their impact to the retail load and against the baseline.
Right, but that's up for us to decide how we would leverage it, right? So,
Yeah, but I think my point was really that solar without storage really cannot operate in the demand response market.
Solar without storage could, it gets a little more, if it's behind a retail point of interconnection, when the solar array is producing and it reduces the load, it can, perform as such. That's more of a passive resource.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not an active resource. It's just, and we have a projection. We think this is what's going to occur.
And so a passive resource could do demand response. That's
Passive
surprising.
demand response, not active, like submitting energy bids, like an active demand response resource would. It would be passive. It would be saying, here's our probabilistic viewpoint, this is going to occur, and you would get some rating against it. And so in that case, it becomes only a capacity market resource, which is a whole another level of exposure and risk. And we will talk about that in a little bit.
Okay. Any other questions on demand response? I don't see any. So you go right ahead, David.
Great. So yeah, we've pretty much covered the demand response discussion here. Certainly because demand response energy balance doesn't take place in your particular settlement model, it's cross to load. You still get a benefit by the demand response activation of lowering your regional network service load or capacity requirement if it occurs in those peak hours in which those values are set. So it does have that value. The other point where I was mentioning that a passive resource such as solar could participate, if it's being put in the market, its only participation model then is in the capacity market. And if in doing so, you take on inherently large risks. So by the time you were to implement this, you would probably be in the range of a penalty rate for non-performance in a capacity shortage condition of $9,336 a megawatt hour. That'll jump to $10,485 a megawatt hour, FCA 19, which is June 1, 2028. So just for context, if you put a passive resource in your solar output to reduce your load, you model that, say, hey, we think it's worth X. And then in the hour in which, let's say, there's a what's called capacity scarcity condition, reserves are being activated, and you're not performing at the capacity which you sold to the market, for every megawatt you don't deliver, you're charged a penalty rate that is in effect at that time. And you will be looking at the $99,336 megawatt hour penalty. And then the year after that would be $10,485 megawatt hour. So it's got some risk to it, particularly on a non-controlled resource. Okay, so this is just a pictorial representation of what the demand response will look like. You can have a number of assets, and it can roll up into a resource that's represented in the market. Either for passive, it'd be capacity market; for an active resource, it'd be energy and capacity, depending what you decide to participate in. Any questions on that? All right. So the other model, which also has its level of sophistication, is the distributed energy resource aggregation model. And again, this is the order, FERC order 2222, has not yet been approved by FERC for New England. It's still being considered, as again, there's a bit of paper still being exchanged on the last response, the deficiency letter response. There's 7 participation models and for distributed energy resource aggregation. These resources are actually treated. The whole concept behind a distributed energy resource aggregation is allow these resources to aggregate over a geographic footprint. In this case, it's more constrained in the DR space. Concord has what's called a metering domain. It's a settlement model artifact that allows us to balance your energy requirements and accurately settle you in the market. These resources are constrained there, so they actually participate in the market as generators. That means, for lack of a simple description, that means they can participate in energy, capacity, reserves, if so configured, and frequency control. What it also means is they are settled discreetly such that there is no pushback benefit to Concord Municipal Light in this type of configuration. There is no RNS pushback, no capacity tag offset. Each of these resources are settled as a distinct energy market participant, and therefore don't provide any pushback savings to Concord on RNS or capacity. So that's kind of the footprint for them. Again, difficult to implement in terms of, you have to set up first you have to opt in. So under Order 2222, any system, distributed distribution utility that has 4 million megawatt hours or less must opt in, must raise their hand, make notification to the ISO they want to participate in this under Order 2222. It then requires that Concord Municipal Light coordinate with those parties. In other words, if I'm a distributed energy resource aggregator and I want to participate, I have to identify the sites in your territory that I want to have participate, coordinate with Concord Municipal Light as to whether they're eligible to participate, work on interconnection, make sure that it's sufficiently under state model, interconnected correctly. And then as you move forward, there's a requirement that Concord would then participate in the coordination of this resource's participation in the markets. That is, let's say I'm an aggregator. I want to participate with my distributed energy resource aggregation. I'm going to bid in the day-ahead market. I'm going to call Dave and say, by the way, I have these customers on these circuits. Can you tell me, will those circuits be active during tomorrow's market so that I'm not going to put in a day-ahead bid and then not be able to perform? There's that coordination that's required under the FERC standard. Additionally, in real time, if an unfortunate tree falls down on a pole, strips the wires off, that circuit's down, I need to understand that my customer is no longer able to participate in the real-time market. there's an hour ahead change I can make in the markets to adjust my bidding. But there's that level of coordination that FERC expects to have take place. That's a requirement of the order. It also requires that, again, either Concord as the, let's say, the aggregator, if you were, or third party, to then get into configuring a remote terminal unit to gather the instantaneous data, communicate with the ISO, communication front end for receipt of dispatch, and then you actually have to have staff that can dispatch and respond to ISO orders on dispatch of that resource. Would require day-ahead energy market submissions if you were a capacity resource, and then of course you can also participate in the real time. So that's the framework. No pushback for RNS, no pushback for capacity. High level of engagement, not only with Concord, even if they're not the party doing the aggregation, and then high levels of engagement for the party that's going to participate in this. Still waiting for an order. I'm expecting that to come out September, October timeframe. And again, I've covered this, without the RNS offset, you're giving up about $11,720 a megawatt of offset. The rates are as they are for the RNS rate. So it's a significant loss of opportunity while taking on a significant level of sophistication and participation requirement. Pause there to see what questions folks may have.
Would that coordination require something beyond the AMS system that we're looking at, something like a SCADA?
So those coordination requirements aren't fully described in the FERC order, and there's not a uniform approach just yet. The expectation is that perhaps you could communicate that this circuit's out or that circuit's out. That's possible. There was a distributed utilities working group that looked at this, but there's no uniformity in which they are planned to implement.
So it sounds like this is still a product or a market being developed. There's a lot of Wild West kind of statements where, it's still being figured out.
It is. Implementation timelines are out until 2026 because of the system changes that the ISO has to make. By context, mid-continent looking to go into 2030 to implement, because it's a great amount of work that needs to go in place in these market systems of the RTOs to implement these programs.
And one more question. So the first option you talked about, which seemed to be the simplest. I'm trying to look for the acronym you used.
Settlement only generator?
Yeah. That works on data from the substation and whether or not we're feeding back, and all we get is real-time energy value. So with this kind of this option that was in front of us here, if we had that going, how would that affect the option A that maybe we would implement at an earlier time frame?
So let's say you put the settlement only generator in place, and then you decide to implement a distributed energy resource aggregation model as well. So there is an energy balance that takes place in your metering domain. And so if these resources, the DERAs, are participating at the retail point of interconnection, I don't see how the aggregation of their output would allow you to have anything but zero possibly, or perhaps another number if you have some resources that are not behind retail points of interconnection that are pushing back. You have to balance that and determine what that number is.
So you have to do the math. So the meter may say we're pushing back 3 megawatts, but we've got this other program where our retail customers are pushing back 1 megawatt. So net, we only get 2 megawatts worth of value in the retail market.
That's correct. So the settlement model actually has to account for this. Otherwise, it's in balance, right? People are charging incorrectly, paid incorrectly, and Christine Beaudry at E&E does this all day long. Well, not all day long, but they do this for a lot of our folks. And for the market to function correctly, that math has to take place on an accurate level. And that's the design of the distributed energy resource aggregation. When it started, having put the settlement model together at the ISO back in 2003, when we went to standard market design, I purposely said, look, you have to constrain this to a metering domain level. Otherwise, you can't effectively balance the energy settlement for the whole of the market, And that design incorporated that feedback.
Great. All right. Any other questions on this third option from the board? I don't see any. So David, you can go right ahead.
Just a pictorial representation. It's very similar to the DR. It's a number of locations. You have to, in this case, you're constrained to the Concord Municipal Light metering domain. Distributed demand response has a much bigger footprint. It's called a distributed demand response aggregation zone. It's across multiple domains. The reason is there's no energy balance required at a local level. Slightly different model. This is actually participating in the energy market, submitting bids, and therefore must be represented as if it was a generator in the settlement model. So let's see, again, just to talk about the settlement only generator option, a recap here. So if the settlement only generator were to be the option, you certainly could participate in the capacity market if you wish. And for those that are familiar with the forward capacity market, that's a 3.5-year forward market where we clear resources. They sell their capacity to meet the resource adequacy requirement of the region, that 1 day in 10 loss of load probability. You sell forward, and then when you get to that delivery period in the hourly markets, you're being evaluated as to your meeting your capacity obligation. So if there's a hot summer like we just had, and we get into a situation called a capacity scarcity condition, we activate, we have deficiency of reserves, then you're being measured. And if you're not delivering on your obligation, you're penalized, as I said earlier. And so there's risk. And so, that's one market you can play in as an SOG, settlement only generator. The other is just the energy market. And because you're settlement only generator and you're not modeled in the ISO's energy management system, you're only in the settlement system, you don't submit day-ahead bids. You just get whatever you're producing at the time you're producing it as pushback, gets paid the real-time LMP. So, and if you're pushing back, when the prices are 385, you're getting paid 385. But if you're pushing back when the prices are printing negative, your megawatts are getting charged for those negative LMPs. And theoretically, if your pushback is solar based, and you look at the real-time data these days, and you're at the duck curve effect is going on, and the actual real-time load in a day is actually lower than the overnight load, you could see negative pricing. Fast forward it as the penetration of offshore wind comes on, and the solar resources, even in front of the meter, continue to come on. The models are showing that we'll have a number of periods in which negative pricing is occurring. In fact, there may be requirements to spill offshore wind, open the blades and let it spill because the system can't handle it. So those models are showing a fair amount of negative pricing in future years. It's something to consider when you consider this model. The beauty of the settlement only generator is you get the full value of the pushback to reduce your regional network service loads if you hit the peak of the month, and also if you hit the seasonal peak to push down on the capacity supply obligation of Concord Municipal Light. So I'll pause there. That's a recap of the settlement only generator approach.
Laura.
Thank you, Brian. David, I wonder if you could speak to a confusion I have where under the settlement only generator, you mentioned that the pushback would qualify for both the regional transmission monthly peak and the seasonal annual peak.
Mm-hmm.
But then how can we participate in the capacity market twice? If we do the one up top here, where you clear position 3.5 years in advance,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's also being used to offset our meter settlement at Eversource. Are we selling the capacity twice?
It's a good question. So the settlement only resource, the generator is a resource. It's measured by its product. Now, the fact that you have eliminated your capacity supply obligation You can eliminate it by, let me think about this. Good question.
Are we essentially going negative?
You don't go negative. So you would, if you were to time the contribution such that it wipes out your capacity tag, it's at 0. You have no CLO, no capacity supply obligation requirement. And you're settling the capacity resource. It's still a resource in the marketplace. It does seem odd to me. It's still a capacity resource. You just don't have the obligation. It still works, actually. It does seem like you're getting paid twice. But that's how demand response works as well, actually. It's not reconstituted. It gets paid capacity while it's still reducing the capacity obligation of your footprint. So that's how it works.
Huh.
Furthermore, the knock-on effect, if you follow the math, because you've reduced your load, it now impacts the long-term load forecast and drops the whole regional obligation down by an incremental piece, because now that your reduction is captured in the models of the long-term load forecast.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Warren?
Yeah, this is really a very helpful presentation, and this model does seem appealing. And with the risk that there could be times of negative pricing, couldn't, in that case, if that started to be a regular occurrence, CMLP work with some of the solar generators in town to arrange curtailment of their generation at times when prices are negative?
I would think, yes, they could curtail, but I think we could also invest in energy storage and absorb that energy and then distribute it later on when there is positive pricing. Yeah. And to add to Warren's question, I'm sorry, David, to answer for you, but please feel free to answer and add to it. You just go ahead and answer it. I've lost my train of thought. I apologize.
No worries. And your point's spot on. You could add storage to help mitigate those occasions. The other part of a sediment-only generator, it's very nimble in terms of, whereas a generator, a big G, big A generator, takes like a year to get into the ISO system because it has to be included in the ISO network model and EMS models. Sediment-only generator is like 5-day notification to the ISO. As long as the metering has been verified with the host utilities, which is you and Eversource, you would engage the ISO staff. You would have the form filled out. It's actually an online form these days. And it's very easy to implement and also easy to undo. A capital G, a big generator, a year-long process to get into the market, and then it's also quite a while to get it out. So this is nimble. It allows you the flexibility coming in and out of it with coordination between yourselves and Eversource. And Brian's point's well taken. There's a number of sophisticated ways at controlling the output, but you have to plan that, as you said, Warren. What can you do? And you're seeing a lot of solar being combined with storage. So there is that option as well.
So David, you talked about, being negative price to pushback.
Yeah.
If we were doing that today, what would, a roundabout number be per kilowatt hour?
So that's a good question. So, that's a great question, Dave, because there's a couple things going on. This is also going into discussions I've been having with ISO and others been having about the future world. And the negative prices, so the ISO allows folks to bid at $150 negative. And they actually do that right today under what's called do not exceed dispatch for wind. It's in the model. That's how they can use an economic model to make sure they're turning down the right resources. And what are people bidding negative by? Well, they're bidding negative by, generally the renewables are based on how many megawatts they produce. That's the rec credit value. It's also the contract value. If every megawatt I produce, I get $67 for, I'm willing to go negative $67 in the marketplace. And so you're seeing the fact that these negative values can be quite steep, and they're going to be tied to the value of the megawatt being produced, the rec credit value being produced. And, again, the current model allows a negative 150,000 megawatt hour bid into the marketplace. So Dave, we're developing those values. We're seeing them occur. You know, it's kind of amazing how many hours of negative values we already had. And the expectation based on the models we're seeing is they'll occur even more in the future. Then, you know, as Brian mentioned, that could be absorbed by grid scale storage. We just don't know, or part of it. But be mindful, grid scale storage has not taken off to an extent here. The interconnection costs have been quite big.
And our questions have led to discussions about you know, negative real-time pricing and capacity obligations going to zero, but the probability of either of those things happening, they're really they're not the meat of what we'll see day to day. In other words, you know, the negative pricings are, you know, more frequent than we expected, but still a very rare event. And the idea that we get our capacity obligation to zero is, I think, a fantasy to me, because I think we're always going to have, you know, net consumption, and that's when our peaks happen in town for demand for energy. So I don't see us hitting a zero capacity obligation. And RNS, you know, will have at some point in the day or in the month, we'll have a positive, you know, consumption. So our RNS obligations will be set there. So that won't go to zero. But it's an interesting topics to talk about, but I don't want people hearing this discussion to avoid you know, negative pricing because you know, the fear is overblown. So I want to put it in perspective of how frequently you think that will happen. And it will happen when solar is producing, which is what this town is going to be able to do for a resource that would create a pushback scenario. So what are your thoughts? Do you think I'm accurate in that statement, or how, what do you, I want to know what you think.
No, it's thanks for going there on that. And you know, if you look at real-time curves, right? So as the solar penetration across the region picks up, and we're at about 4,000 megawatts, I'd say, in front of the meter right now, and 4,000 behind the meter. Behind the meter is going to explode. It's going to get higher and higher. So that's going to push the real-time load down. And if you have an additional renewable resources on the margin, you're going to be pushing the prices down. So it's the probable occurrences, right? Brian, to your point, is those are certainly more future on more probability. But the likelihood that you're on a hot, sunny summer day when you're producing your maximum solar output could be coincident with all other solar in the region, you know, pushing at the same time. So there's an increase that can't tell you on a percentage basis how often it would occur. My point here is only to highlight that there are those occasions, those are the risks that are out there. And as the data becomes more evident, you can start valuing what that means. And so I could not even give you a number. And to an extent, you know, the Eversource system peak in your area is occurring from a transmission perspective. You would have to, as you know, as solar increases penetration, as you're probably seeing already, the peak shift later in the day. So your contributions start backing off because you're not at the right, you don't have the right azimuth to the panel, and you start losing some of that production. So, you know, you're dealing with some probabilities.
Yeah, as we go from a duck curve to a unicorn peak, and then we add some storage.
Yeah,
you know, the storage would be collecting the energy produced midday or in the morning, and then just, you know, putting it into that unicorn peak to kind of mitigate that ramp. But then you in the morning, when we get to that 10 to 1 o'clock on a Sunday morning in the spring or the fall, and we're solar saturated, those storage devices that are reducing our unicorn peak are creating artificial demand to reduce that negative price outcome. But that requires utility scale storage, which we currently do not have. And that's something we need to start looking at strongly.
Yeah, and
scenario.
And to your point, I mean, we don't know what the electrification of the economy is going to do, right? So,
Yeah.
and if you know, the governor signed a law, 2035, no more ICEs and, can be sold in Massachusetts, right? So if the adoption of electric vehicles and large scale storage come on, then there is the probability, if they do it correctly, that they would attack the duck curve. They would take opportunity in the midday on low pricing to ameliorate the concerns on negative pricing. But as we sit here today, I can't tell you, how that might play out.
All right. Do you have anything else to finish on your slides?
It's a good question. It's just a recap of the others, which I've already recapped in our discussions, the value of them, and that being demand response does give you an ability to push back because it's energy balances beyond your metering domain, but you have to choose between what type of model you want to do. Participate as a passive, which means either you're just keeping it behind the meter, or you're playing in the capacity market with the inherent risk there, or you're active, then you have a little bit more, you have more work in terms of configuring RTUs, participation with the ISO, participation a day ahead, and other markets. And then, of course, the distributed energy resources is much more sophisticated, and all DR and DERA are at the retail point of interconnection. The rest here we've covered about the penalties in the capacity market, which starts to participate there. We've talked about settlement generators are a real-time market resource only. So I think, Brian, I pretty much all these slides we've talked through, but if people are interested, I can go through them. But the facts are the facts. Settlement only is a lighter lift, and your risks there are negative pushback on the LMP is really the risk there.
Yeah. I have two final questions on this, and they're less market questions. Well, I guess our connection to the ISO transmission network, we have to wheel across a section of Eversource's transmission. Do we have to contract with them to reverse that flow of energy? Do we have to change any of our agreements? Do we have to do anything with Eversource about that hop from our substation to the ISO transmission? Is there anything in that contract that needs to change if we change the flow direction? Maybe David Wood might know.
Yeah, we would have to work on our contract with Eversource to allow for that. So it'd be negotiations with them. In addition, we have operational things that would need to happen in the substation. We'd have to
That was
change
my next one. Yeah.
some relays and some protective devices to allow for backflow. So there are items that are needed, but we would have to work with Eversource to get approval.
Okay. And the engineering of the substation to allow for this flow back, what's with a rough capital investment into that substation? Is that, hundreds of thousands of dollars? Is that millions of dollars? I'm kind of going to get a ballpark on low entry cost, high entry cost. I know you don't know the number, so.
Yeah, it's not millions, but I would say it's most likely a couple $100,000 with labor and equipment and all that. And we haven't looked at it yet, so I'm going to reserve the right to change that number, but
Yeah.
it's probably somewhere in that range.
Okay. All right. Alice, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. When you were I'm sorry, Dave, when you were just flipping through the slides, I think I saw a recommendations page. Can we go to that and just take a look at the recommendations? And these are ISO recommendations, or what? Tell me about this page.
It would be my ENE recommendation if you were to consider the approach for your consideration, that the settlement only generator is probably the lightest lift, the easiest one to implement, provide you the regional network service reductions and the values you see here, pretty substantial. And also could, if executed during the time of the annual peak, reduce your capacity tag. And again, your risk there is when you're producing the LMPs, if you're hitting negative pricing, what might occur there. Then I just highlight, that's really the recommendation. And it's for the reasons that you avoid all the other issues.
Okay, just making sure I understood that. Thank you.
No, thanks for asking.
Are there any other questions from the board? I don't see any. Well, thank you very much. Oh, Wendy, go ahead.
Sorry, Brian, I just had one question. It's more an observation and something the board will have to discuss, but part of pursuing this was understanding sort of the battery storage capacity that we've been looking at currently to offset our solar saturation. So that need is still critical, even under this solution. And I don't know if it's more or less battery storage that we would need, but something that we also need to consider going forward. So regardless, you know, the utility scale storage is still needs to be done sooner than later for this or to meet our current issue risk.
David's, either of you can jump in, but yeah, I think that this is the ability for us to send excess generation has value, and it by doing so reduces the total amount of storage we may need. But we will still need storage for many of the things in town. We can't really reduce peaks without storage that has, you know, available, and for those negative pricing moments, we'll need storage for managing, you know, our curve. We're going to need storage, but when we get to the point where we have a lot of generation, say we get to 25 megawatts or 20 megawatts of solar generation, we may not need 60 megawatt hours of storage. We may need 30 or something to that effect if we're able to do this pushback. And Dave Wood, please let me know if you agree with that idea. Or Laura also has a.
I hear you. There's a lot of complications with what's coming out, where you're going to put all the battery, those sort of things. One of the things that I think the board really should be looking at is trying to come up with some numbers on how often we would be paying to export, because you're buying that solar at, you know, X amount per kilowatt hour, and then you're paying to get rid of it. And, you know, how is that going to affect things? And I think that's where the battery comes in, Brian, where you're talking about. But for us on that side, it's where are we going to put that amount of batteries? And that would be a challenge, but it is a solution.
Laura?
So I look at this a little bit differently. I think that this solution is a physical solution to our overcapacity problem. Okay, it gives us an outlet aware of what to do when we get too much solar. There is a risk of negative pricing, but as David just said, I agree with him 100%. The battery is a question of finances. Okay, if we did pushback, we wouldn't need a battery. If we can push back, we don't need a battery physically. But would it be smart to put a battery in, because it would be more financially advantageous? And so I think that calculation needs to be performed. But my feeling up front is that this is going to be a more cost-effective solution. We have to factor in, you know, the cost to upgrade the system. We have to see if Eversource is going to charge us something to do this reverse, right? We don't know. It's going to be a negotiation. But all those costs, you add them up, right, compared against a very expensive battery, and let's see what it looks like. If you would let me share my screen. Can I do that?
I'll stop sharing, and I'm going to have a comment to add based on a little bit of this discussion.
Okay, we can go back.
You'll need to consider. One thing to consider. Go ahead, Laura. I'll let you do your sharing, and then I'll comment.
Okay. Let's do, and I just put this together very quickly, so it's not real pretty, but can you all see this chart?
Not yet.
No.
Not yet. Okay, well, let's try it again.
There we go.
Okay, so what this is on the left, it's dollars per megawatt hour. This is from the beginning of the year through August 1st. What has the real-time hourly price been? Okay, so you can see the winter was horrendous. It was up around $200 a megawatt hour. We got some price relief later, and I apologize you can't see the dates, but you know they're going to be 8,760 numbers here eventually when the whole year transpires. But this gives you a flavor for how many hours were negative. And you can see down here, here's where Dave's talking about the minus 150. There was I think it was on May 17th, minus 151. There was minus 101. And then there are a few hours in here, minus 35, minus 14. But it's sort of a handful. I don't know if we can add them up here. Maybe 30 hours so far this year. Now, I think this is going to, as everyone said, this is going to get worse. So we have to factor in, you know, on these, what are we going to get for excess solar production? And if we bought a battery to translate these less valuable hours into more valuable hours, would it pay for the battery lease payment or the outright capital purchase? And remember, the battery is going to be quite expensive. So I think it's going to prove to be better to do this pushback for a while. And then as Leon said, is if we see the market getting worse and worse, we keep running the analysis, and at some point it may make sense to put the battery in. Okay, so that's all I had to say about that.
Thanks, Laura. That's
And
where I
so
was going.
I wanted to also comment, because Brian mentioned something about 20, 25 megawatts of solar. The settlement only generator approach caps at 5 megawatts of pushback. If you go beyond 5 megawatts of pushback, then we have to go with a capital G, capital A generator, which means we must model it with the ISO, model it in their energy management system. And then there you're required to put in bids into the day-ahead market and the real-time market if you take a capacity position. So it's an important threshold, if you will,
Yeah.
that you have to consider.
Well, that is good to know, because that the strategy of setting up this SOG, and then as we find we're getting near that 5 megawatt cap for a discharge, that could be the signal that says now we should make an investment into energy storage to reduce that, and that could, because I agree with Laura that this ability to feed back puts the necessity of storage, it lessens the intensity of that need, and gives us some ability to better plan, because we can see how the market develops before we make an investment into big scale energy storage, you know, at that 60 megawatt hour level. Great, and it's important to know it's capped. Thank you, David, for that.
Brian, can we wrap this up, because I know David has another meeting to go to.
Yes, I want to let Warren, he's been very patient, but then we'll conclude there, if that's all right.
I agree with the comments Laura was making, which were really to the point. One thing about being able to delay storage purchase for the town is the cost of large scale energy storage is only going to come down. And if we could do it a little later rather than sooner, that'll be a better investment for the light plant.
It also may change the technology of the energy storage. You know, maybe lithium ion is scaled and popular now, but it has a short lifespan. Things like flow batteries or other technology may have more losses in the round trip, but may be able to hold on for power longer, and may, you know, this 5 megawatts buffer may allow us to use different technology. I do want to move on and get to our next talk about broadband pricing, but I want to ask if there's any final questions. Seeing no hands, we will now move on. Pamela, we're going to hold public comments until the end. Thank you, David.
You bet.
So I'm going to move to Jason, and you would like to talk about broadband pricing.
I would, thank you. I'll try to make this quick. I know we're a little bit behind schedule. I'm just going to share my screen briefly. So, you know, we'd like to talk a little bit about the plans and pricing of broadband, and I'll go into quickly what is prompting this. So first of all, there's been a lot of conversation about providing a low income tier for customers in town. We do have a rate assistance program for the electricity side, but we don't have anything for the broadband side. And this is a topic that has come up many times over the years, and we think that it's a good time to address that. Second, we get a lot of people asking us directly via email, via phone, or our installers if there's any chance of increasing speed. So we know that our speeds right now are behind the market, but we also are getting directly asked by customers who are willing to pay more and would like faster speeds. So we feel like that's a driver. And looking at the market, Comcast and others can offer considerably higher download speeds and for different rates. So we'd like to kind of move that forward so we can remain competitive. Next, and you guys can see my screen, right?
Yep.
In terms of the process, we have been working on this for a few months now. We have been looking at our competitors. We have been sort of analyzing, the cost benefit situation as a result of changing prices and trying to gauge, what adoption might lead to this change or that change. We've been looking at historical changes that have been made and how they've been received. We'd also like to move on to a community survey, which we have ready, and I'll announce at the end of this quick presentation. And that is to gauge customers and resident, interest in what they would like to do. We think that that's really going to be an important part of informing our decision as what we're going to recommend to the Light Board. And in terms of that, and then we'll move on to actually creating a rate and speed proposal, so we can say these are the tiers we think we should offer at these rates. And then while it might not be technically required, we think it would be prudent to have a formal rate hearing on this at the Light Board. I'm not sure if this was done the last time speeds were changed, but I think that Dave and I both agree that it's good to get public input, and it would be good to have a formal process when we change any fees associated with broadband. Then once it's adopted, it may be adopted at a later date, to be put in place. Then we'll move on to the communication phase where we reach out to customers and potential customers to let them know what the new rates and tiers would be. Our goals in this are to incorporate a lower income tier, offer faster speeds in general, maintain or increase revenue. As you know, expenses are increasing in every sector. It's the same is true for us. Some of our internet providers are charging the same for a little bit faster speeds. Others are charging more for additional services, and we have no option to remove those. All of our suppliers are increasing costs. So it's important that we at least maintain a revenue. This is not solely intended to be a revenue increasing gesture. We're just really trying to better align ourselves with the market. We also want to make sure that there's fairness in the fees that we charge. If we do create different tiers or different plans, we want to make sure that one person, neighbor A is not paying one rate for the same speed that neighbor B is getting, but paying something different. So we want to make sure there's equity, and that if things are changed, that we make sure that it's fair. And then we also have these additional services like static IPs or additional advanced DNS services that we offer that historically have been limited just to business customers. And what that does is it pushes residents to move to a business plan, which they're not really businesses. And then they, that impacts their response time for our technicians when they have an outage. So it's not advantageous to us to have residential customers on a business plan. So by kind of breaking out these packages, we might be able to offer these services to residents as well. And we have had multiple people ask us for these plans. Other ideas that we have been kicking around are, as I mentioned, we have a lot of customers who are no longer current customers, but have already paid the installation costs for Concord broadband service. We think it might make good sense to offer a no installation fee for those specific customers, since they've already paid the installation fee once, and that subsequent installation would be just simply handing them a piece of equipment, plugging it in, versus potentially spending hours to splice fiber, run fiber, and do make ready work at the location. We also think that any lost revenue in that would be offset by the increase in customers that we'd get as a result of waiving those fees. And then also any other maybe limited promotions or referral programs. We're interested in the board's thoughts on how these can work. If the board is thinking that it might make sense to get formal approval before we do any of these, programs. Again, we're not looking to turn into Comcast's rebate program or referral program, or create hundreds of tiers and have everybody paying different amounts for the same speed. We would be very straightforward and simple with these things. But if we do have a way to market and increase our reach, we would like some input on whether that should be brought back to the board every time, or maybe there's some parameters put on that, and as long as we're in those parameters, then it's fine. And then the last slide that I really have before I show this link to the survey is we have two main approaches that we can take here, and within each approach there's kind of another decision that needs to be made. The very first one is, do we keep all the speeds that we have and the tiers that we have and just simply add a higher speed plan? And if we do that, do we then maybe increase all plans, a certain amount, a few dollars, $5 to $10, or do we keep all the rates exactly what they are and just add this higher speed plan? The benefit of that, there would only be essentially two additional new plans, one for enterprise and one for residential. But the downside is you might not see as much movement from the people who are interested, but might not really take action unless there's a motivator. The other option is to create all new plans and pricing and say these more closely align with what the market is looking like, among other providers. And these are the tiers that we think are reasonable and fairly priced. In doing that and kind of drafting a couple of those to look at it, we would see a much faster increase for people with a pretty modest increase in price, but we would essentially create all new tiers. And if we do that, then do we grandfather people in, which would make a large amount of people happy? They don't want to change, they're happy. Or do we say these are the new tiers, we need people to move to one or another? You can maybe take a slight decrease and pay what you're paying or less, or you can pay us a little bit more and move to these new tiers. So again, we don't want to talk specifics, but we're certainly interested in the board's thoughts on what type of approach we might want to take. And then the last slide I have is just that the survey is live. If you go to concordma.gov/BB survey, you can take it right now, and you can certainly email us broadband@concordma.gov if you're having a hard time finding that. We're going to be publishing this on our website and also pushing it out through social media. And anybody who's signed up to receive email notifications from us specifically relating to broadband, not just blasting it to all customers, but just those people who've signed up to receive that. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, if I can figure out where my Zoom window went, and then I'd be happy to hear the board's thoughts on this.
Wendy, your thoughts?
So I just thank you, Jason, for the background, and I appreciate you recognizing that we're behind the market and our rates aren't competitive. I've always heard that we are competitive, but I've never really thought we were. But to your question about what is the right approach, I don't know what the right approach is. I'd like to see your analysis and the feedback from the customers, because I don't think we have enough information to provide enough direction to you. Personally, I don't think we've increased our rates a lot, if I recall, but I think until we understand how far off we are on the market, I don't know. I'm not feeling comfortable weighing in until we see that information.
Yeah, that was kind of
surveying and getting it's good.
Yeah, that was our approach too, is we have identified these potential options and we're looking at the impact, but without sort of the data of how many people would be happy with a change or be, then we can't really estimate how many people would move, how many people would stay, how many people would be upset, or how many people would be happy. So I think that's a good approach, but thank you.
Alice.
So my question is a little along the lines of Wendy's. We are in a competitive market for the services that we provide. And so it seems to me that we have to really understand the whole package of what our competitor has out in the market, not just the cost for each of the speed packages, but what else do we provide that drives only 20% of Concordians to sign up for broadband and 80% going with our competitor. And so unless we understand what are those competitive forces, not looking at what our current customers are willing to pay, but can we attract enough of a base within our own community to be able to be competitive with the services that we offer. I know we don't do TV, but voice over internet might be something that people are interested in having as a backup. I don't know, but I think understanding the competitive forces are key to our being able to grow the network in town.
Yeah, one of the questions in the survey does relate to providing a mesh network service. That's something we don't currently provide now. We make recommendations for people, but a lot of people without a technical background struggle if they have a large home or a home that's geographically spread out to get that adequate wireless coverage throughout the house. But it's something that we just kind of recommend to them now. But that's something that I ask in the survey is would you be interested in something like that?
Yeah.
So I had a question about, most people don't know how much broadband speed they're actually using. They don't, you can say that, the basic plan is this many megabytes per second and so forth, but it's very hard for the customer to right size and understand. Is there a way, could you create a way for a customer to get some basic metrics on their usage to understand if they've got too large of a plan or maybe they're constantly hitting their speed cap, and inform the customers a bit better so that any of these changes, they'll have data on their habits to be able to make the best decision.
Yeah. So we do have some options available today in the software that we use that allows us to sort of size plans appropriately. There's additional features we can use because historically we focused more on just a slow installation pace as opposed to a widespread marketing campaign, so that we didn't end up with a influx of new customers or changes. We haven't really approached that, but I think that that's a great idea, that we need to provide that information to customers who might be always hitting 80 to 100% of their bandwidth, and they don't even know it. Other times you have people who have plenty of bandwidth and they just have issues with distance to their router or wireless problems. So it is difficult sometimes to tell just based on the software. Maybe somebody would be using more bandwidth if they had different devices or a different use case scenario, but we can probably grab 80% of those issues electronically and then reach out to those people. So that's a good suggestion.
Is there a way to make that such that the customer can log into the website and get that data versus contacting someone?
So we have worked with the GIS department, and we have gotten Esri, the online mapping platform, has created a broadband package, and we've deployed that to test internally. One of the things that it offers is a speed and bandwidth test that you can perform, and when you do it, it actually sends that data to our map so that all customers could do speed tests, and you could see what the average speed is among all customers. But there's some additional functionality on that might be possible. The thing that I'm thinking of, the marketing arm of our Calix software, isn't designed for end users, but there might be a portal in that advanced package that we don't currently license that would allow people to go in and see what their thing is. I think historically Comcast, Verizon, and others, they don't want people to know. The truth is that they might not really be using a lot of their bandwidth, and that if you have 4 people in your house, you need a gig per month. Realistically, that's not the case for most people. So I think that, giving people the honest answer has not always been the market's desire, because it doesn't benefit them, because they can sell bandwidth that people aren't really using. But I definitely support empowering people if we can do that, and we'll look to see if it's possible.
Great, thank you. Warren.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Wendy and Alice about what they were recommending about how to proceed, with one exception. I think your comment about waiving installation fees for returning customers is a really good idea, and that you were talking about earlier starting to market to those customers. I don't think we should start marketing to those customers until you've made a decision to waive the installation fees, right? Because otherwise they're going to be disappointed if they think they're going to have to pay an installation fee again.
Of course, yeah, that was our intention.
Good, great. Any other questions from the board on broadband?
I wanted to say, so for next steps, we're hopeful that we can, when we've the results have tapered off, and we can analyze those, we'll come back to the board with a formal proposal, and based on that data and the sort of estimates that we've put together internally with our financial team, and then schedule a rate hearing for that.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to move on to public and liaison comments. I know Wendy has a comment she wants to make, so I'll give her the opportunity first.
I'm just checking my, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I just want to make one very brief comment, and that is that the Financial Audit Committee met yesterday, and just want to recognize that the CMLP's audited financials are complete, and want to recognize that as part of that, it was a clean audit, of course, and then there's no management letter being issued, which is a very unusual fact, and it just speaks to how good that audit went. So kudos to Matt and the team on that audit. Really great information. And I think Brian at a future meeting will have information about that audit reviewed, but just want to share that good news. There was also a discussion around the loan of the $1.9 million, and just an acknowledgement that that was cost that was borne by CMLP on behalf of broadband. And when we do review those financials, we should have more discussion about it. I know that was a hot topic in the broadband report, so more to follow on that, but
Great.
Thank you all. It's great work.
Dave has already mentioned he wants to go over a lot of the financials next month in September.
Great.
Alice?
Hi, I just wanted to give a very short update. The governor signed the energy bill, the massive climate and energy bill recently, and it ended with 10 communities who had passed home rule petitions. The language that allowed communities to go forward in a pilot for requiring all electric new construction went through and was signed. There are many questions still regarding whether, which of those communities still qualify, and whether it allows other communities, like you may have seen the news yesterday that Michelle Wu announced that the city of Boston is applying today for home rule petition and bylaw for requiring new construction in Boston to be fossil fuel free. So the DOER is going to have to develop a process for choosing the 10 communities. And it's not limited to the 10 who had already approved and have bylaws in place.
Oh.
It may be expanded to cities that have other interests like Boston, Worcester, Springfield. And there are a number of communities that are putting forward home rule petition requests now. So it's not a given for Concord to be all electric in this first pilot. There's a strategy meeting at 10 o'clock today that I'll be attending.
Okay, thank you. That's good detail. I had assumed that we were one of those 10, and it sounds like the 10 is not defined yet.
Right.
All right. Is that all you wanted to update us on?
Yep.
Does anyone else want to raise their hand if they have a public or liaison comment? After we're done public and liaison comments, we'll be doing an executive session. So Pamela Dritt.
Pamela, 13 Concord Green. Would it be possible to build out storage more economically if we do it in a distributed fashion, the same way we're building out solar by giving incentives, financial incentives for new residential solar installations to include battery backup? Because it's going to be, if we're heading for time of use rates anyway, which the whole nation is going to end up with, right? Can't we, every homeowner that makes an investment in solar and battery is an investment that CMLP doesn't have to make. And so we also maximize our return by incentivizing them, like we're doing with heat pumps for battery backup. And also, what about the school bus fleet? That's a big mobile battery, right? When we have them all electric, would we not, could we not?
To answer all those questions would take at least 3 meetings because each one is a different structure and complications. The short answer is we're going to do a mix of all those things because that's what's going to be required. So battery storage, it would be great if other people put up the capital, but CMLP today does not have the technology to manage like a connected solutions approach or virtual power plant. So there's a lot of that is being talked about. and is in process, but I can't answer that quickly here.
Yeah,
But you're planning for it, right?
Brian, I'll just say that we are looking at that stuff. And I can't release it right now because it was done in executive session with E&E, but we are looking at programs. So there'll be more to come in the future.
That's great to hear. Vince.
Yeah, Vince Carlson, 34 Everett Street. I'm also on the PEG Access Advisory Committee. And I had a question, I think it's probably mainly for David, and it's on the new meters. And I was wondering if all of the meters require a cell tower connection.
No, they do not.
Is it a combination of cell towers and wired, or, you know, is it all wired?
No, there's a combination of different types of meters. A lot of them are Wi-Fi. And then there's some other ones that are IP linked that go from Wi-Fi to fiber. But that's pretty much it. It's not cellular.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is that we're trying to, at the PEG Access Advisory Committee, determine what the speed is of the small cell rollout, you know, or the pole mounted type small cells, and, you know, just wondering if that's going to be involved with that, but from what you're saying, it isn't, so.
No, they're two separate projects.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Dean.
Good morning, Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. Thank you for the presentation this morning from E&E. Very interesting information. And Laura made some interesting comments about the bias towards battery versus possibly just doing a pushback, and that might doing that financial analysis. So a combination of curtailment during negative pricing and pushback when it's potentially, you know, has economic benefit to the town might be something that serves us well. So that's something you might want to look at, is just a combination of curtailment and pushback. So that's something we can think about if the investment in battery is a complex and expensive thing. So so thank you for all of that information. But one of the things that the new legislation from the Biden administration is going to incentivize is private investment, because there are incentives for all kinds of you know, green initiatives, and solar. People may get off the fence when they see that there are tax benefits for installing solar on their homes. So regardless of how the community is doing in-town solar through the light plant, individuals will be making decisions to add solar. So our solar saturation problem is probably going to be upon us faster than it was now that this legislation has been passed. So that's just another comment I thought I'd make. On Jason, on your presentation, which I thought was fantastic, one of the things that is a kind of a feature of the in-town broadband is that it doesn't bias download speeds versus upload speeds. And my question is there some additional savings that the broadband could make from its infrastructure perspective if we bias download speeds and give people a nice high-speed download, but we sort of limit in some sense the amount of upload speed that they can, or does that take additional software and additional infrastructure to try to get this biased system? Because most systems don't allow you to upload anywhere near as quickly as you can download. So that's just a question as to whether that might provide us with some ability to save a little money while offering a slightly higher download speed. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Brian, are you okay if I answer that?
Yes, go ahead.
So there would not be a benefit to us to do that. Our ISPs provide us symmetrical speeds for upload and download. And the reason that cable typically historically has changed, set it up so that you get much faster download speeds is that they have a certain amount of bandwidth that they can play with. So it's more advantageous for them to carve out just a small upload speed, since the average person, when they carved up that bandwidth, used, you know, say downloaded or uploaded a very small amount, they set it up to be, say, 90% is available for download and 10% is available for upload. And so all of their gear that they've created and set up and installed is sort of programmed for that spectrum to go be assigned to download or upload. So it would be very costly for them to replace everything at once. Now they are over time replacing that gear, adding fiber here and there, and also changing the frequencies they've allocated. So you probably will see over time Comcast start to offer faster upload speeds as well. But that's really why they do it. It's not because they're trying to carve out or limit one or the other.
David Allen. So David, we are about 10 minutes behind already, and we have an executive session we need to do before 9:30. So if you could be brief, I'd appreciate it.
Guaranteed.
Great, thank you.
For sure, Brian. Only came in because I want to notice that the symmetrical offering by broadband is a terrific competitive advantage. It makes Comcast look really bad. Let's stick with that. Enough.
Oh, is that it?
That's
Great.
it.
That was wonderfully brief.
Well, I wasn't coming in until I would have just second what Jason was saying. For goodness sake, let's not lose this fabulous competitive advantage. Enough. I know you guys need to get to executive session.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to conclude the public section of this meeting.
Brian, we need a motion to adjourn regular and to go into executive session, and we need to say the reason that's on the agenda.
Okay.
And then a roll call vote.
Sure. So the reason that we're going into executive session is to discuss contract pricing on existing contracts. This is to inform the board members of the exact values of these kind of contracts, which we do not divulge in public meetings. And it's purely for board education for the future meeting topics. Now, I would like to ask for a motion to adjourn into the adjourn the public session and move into the executive session. Do I have anyone who'd like to make that motion?
Yeah, I move we adjourn regular session and move into executive session.
Great.
Okay.
I think we need to read the pursuant from
Yes.
the agenda. We have to identify why we are moving into executive session. Pursuant to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Open Meeting Law purpose for executive session number 10 to discuss trade secrets or confidential, competitively sensitive, or other proprietary information.
Excellent. All right. So I will take a vote. Wendy,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
Warren,
Yes.
and I agree as well. So this will end the public session. So anyone who is not a board member or CMLP staff, I'd ask that you leave the Zoom call. Thank you very much.